Hey, what's up, guys? Here's the other book, Early U.S. Armor, which is, of course, armor, panzer, right? Tanks, right? Treads. Like, this is a cool photo of the, I think it's the M2 or the M1, with the army and the cavalry had different versions. This is the double turreted version. And I like that they're obviously in the rain somewhere in D.C., and the guy's just sitting out there in the rain. So, but these double turrets are kind of ridiculous looking. But more on that later. Let's go into the tank corps. Of course, one of the early the Holt gas electric tank. Look at that. It's a tractor. Right? It's a tractor. Um, adding armor to a tractor. I mean, the Soviets did that in desperate days in the Second War. They should make an Osprey book on those. The Soviet worker tanks, where they made these tanks out of tractors, and they look really cool and ugly, and they got wiped out within weeks. But interesting. You have another. They would take tractors and put like this crazy looking, like almost like a submarine top on it. These were, what's it, the parade tanks. It's not really a tank. It's like a tank with a cover on it that looks cool. Like something out of I don't know, like something out of an amusement park. But the reality of it, when the Americans came to the First World War, the Great War, the World War, I like calling it the World War, they used the British tanks, and they used the French tanks. These are the French tanks, of course the British tanks, the big one, the Mark IVs. There's no homegrown American tank, although there were attempts by inventors. I remember seeing this at Aberdeen. I don't know where it is now. The skeleton tank, right? The nifty idea, like we'll have the rhomboid shape was really good at crossing trenches. These not so much. But we'll have a two-man crew. We'll make it like a skeleton. Well, it's as light as this. They made it the same weight, about 6 tons. So yeah, 2 guys operating this. I never saw any weapons on this. I don't know. Hopefully they've protected this thing. Aberdeen notorious for letting these things rot out for decades. But anyway, so, and of course the Renault, right? This tank was the obvious design. It had a turret like the armored cars did, right? Like the battleships did. And eventually, this is what America had. Of course, this was. They still had these in Afghanistan apparently, where the Americans went in. Here's the Ford tank, the 3-ton tank, right? Half the weight of this 2-man tank. They didn't like it. A couple of these went over. The American militaries didn't like it, but they used them to tow like artillery or something. It's just interesting looking at that. These tanks. Wow, look at these. I like this picture. Look at these monsters, man. These dudes are almost like, you could tell they're like probably almost afraid. Look at these things. Right, the Mark 8, right, the International. It was actually a joint British-American one, where they actually finally got the idea of, hey, let's not expose the crew to the engine and all the problems with that. Let's cover the engine up. And of course, once the war is over, the tank corps disbanded. Right? The war to end all wars. The rising wave of isolationism, which is a good thing. I'll mention that in another video. So the true Americans, the American attitude was, we don't want war. Never forget that. I know it's hard now. Of course, in those times where the military spending was much less, you still had these army guys like the war criminal Eisenhower, and others trying to figure out what to do with tanks, how to make a tank training school, who was going to control the tanks, the infantry, the cavalry. That was a big thing. Silly things now, but there were still guys who think they were going to use horses. Yeah. All right, and the World War I types were too much like medieval siege engines, useful for a single battle but quickly worn out. Right, the tracks on the heavy tanks had to be replaced after 20 miles of use. The light tanks had to be rebuilt after 80 miles of operation, right, and mechanically undependable. Many of these tanks were lost because they just stopped working. Okay? But don't you love the Osprey? You never get rid of the paintings, the painted artwork. Now the Christie guy. There he is. I believe is that yeah. What's his name? Christie. What's his first name? Not the fat Jersey guy, the idiot. Yeah, the Christie. This inventor. Look at these. Jeez, I'm not getting in that thing. You know. Right, and the durability of tanks are so poor. You still got it. Like right, you gotta bring them to the thing. Anyway, it's just this is fascinating looking at. It's like with the armored cars. Okay, the armored cars are more singular. For the most part, you don't get the mass production of them until later. But the tanks, the army, military in America was really trying to make something of it. Look at that. It's like it's a science fiction. Right? Rock Island was another thing making that. Looks like something in a amusement park, like a bouncy castle. I don't know why I'm getting those vibes. And they had a light tank, so I think a couple of these still exist. I don't know. A lot of these tanks don't exist at all. And the photos in here, that's why I like this. I like the weird, crazy looking tanks that never saw combat. The ones that saw combat are boring. The crazy utopian looking ones, where you have like half mad inventors making them, and people have no idea what the hell the tanks are gonna be doing for real. Trying to get their hands in the pot. Right? So now here's the Christie tank. Of course, the Christie design, the army decides not to buy it, and they don't like him. He's very eccentric. So, but two countries did base their tanks off the suspension, and they look very similar chassis-wise. Right? The British cruiser tanks, I always liked those tanks, even though they were kind of not good in combat. And of course, the Soviets, right? The BT-5, the BT-7, but the T-34, right? It's ironic that they made better use of this design. Yeah. Anyway, so look at these. Like, I remember they had this one at Aberdeen. They actually had this one inside. So I assume wherever they put those tanks now, and of course remember they could go without the treads too. Very interesting. They could still go obviously on the roads. You need the tanks to go off road, but so now you start getting stuff. You get these, steering wheel. They should. Why did they all have? The Tiger had a steering wheel. The Sherman had two levers. The M4, excuse me. Now you're starting to see things getting a little cool suspension, but you're starting to see things now getting a little more like, okay, I recognize this. This is the chassis of an M2. Okay. And then you start getting this funny little thing where once again the infantry and cavalry are fighting over the tanks, right? The infantry wants them to support the infantry, which you should do. The cavalry wants these tanks to speed ahead and break through and envelop, which you do want, right? But they want to do everything separate. So now the infamous combat car. This is getting really nerdy, but at one point, with the funding, right, and you had the cavalry branch, you're adding a Chaffee, right? Of course, Patton was part of the cavalry guys, but the army guys like, no, we want these tanks for infantry support. So this 1920 congressional thing, they wanted to avoid in order to get funding. Right? The cavalry was not allowed to have tanks, so they were not tanks. They're combat cars. So we got around that wording. So you can always get around things. Right? Right. And the shortage of funding. The army, the infantry, and the cavalry were fighting over the money. War pigs. And it's interesting looking at the combat car. Like, look how thin that armor is. Right? The combat car was like, it had a machine gun and a cannon. Oh, cool. Or a large machine gun. Let's say 2 machine guns. But the army, their version had these turrets, the Mae West turrets. Why are they called the Mae? They look like breasts, like two twin turrets. Can you imagine? Like, I can't imagine what's inside this. Yeah, the Mae West tanks. There's videos on that, you can see more, but I always thought it was cool that the infantry had these, and apparently there's a few of these still existing. The infantry like that, almost like the armored cars. Many armored cars had the double turrets too. Right? Anyway, so now we're getting closer to something that we see. They're starting to change the suspensions, right? And you're starting to get the M2. Now the M2 is where you're starting to get something that you actually see in the war. The light tank, the Stuart tanks. Obviously the M2 actually saw combat. The M3 was what we mostly used, but the M2 actually saw combat in Guadalcanal fighting the Japanese in some really chilling little battles. And there's the cavalry, right? Looking at that. There's your replacement. The horses are so upset they're not going to have to go into battle and get chopped up, Stupid humans. The M2 medium tank. Now there's a you could probably find it on YouTube or somewhere. There's a propaganda film I remember seeing on Turner Classic Movies. It was one of the buffer little things. They'd show like something that was like short in order to keep the scheduling with the running time. If let's say there was a movie that was very long or if a movie that was short, they would put like these little news, these kind of things that you'd see in newsreels. You go to the theater and watch. And it was called The Tanks Are Coming. And you had a lovable mug from New York driving a cab, and he gets drafted, and he ends up joining the tank corps. And these were the tanks that they showed. Okay, now the chassis you can see is starting to look like an M4, and that's an interesting film to watch. It's very interesting to watch to see how the everyman, the New Yorker back then, was portrayed. A lovable lug, right? Implied that he had problems with the law, right? Very not offensive at all. I don't care, but in the film, he's treated like absolute shit by the commanding officer who insults him and laughs at his misfortune. So that's something to they think that was okay to show in the newsreel to the public. But you get to see these nifty looking tanks, right? Obviously, these never saw action. I guess you'd say thankfully for the crews. But it is interesting to see. The tanks are coming. Check it out if you can find it. And of course, once again, the Marine Corps, right? They thought they might have their own. They wanted their own thing. They had specifications, so they had these Marmon Harrington tanks that were supposed to be lighter, so they could be transported easier by ship. Right? And I just want to round this out because we're getting to the end here. The Marines end up using the M2s, but some of these, and these tanks are supposedly really bad. Like these things, was the term when they say, oh, it's very high maintenance. Well, yeah, these things were like ultra high maintenance apparently, and you had some of these these ones with the turrets. They sold some to the Dutch, but some of these saw action in the Aleutian Islands, the insane, crazy, horror, Lovecraftian like Aleutian campaign, which is where the only time the Japanese actually invaded technically the United States, and these were the tanks that the guys had. So it's interesting to look more into the Aleutians. And just to round it out with something that I have never seen and I didn't know. Okay, you always can learn something new. You had I missed this. I just saw this on this reading. This is like the 5th time I've looked through this. The Caterpillar Tractor Company, we know them. You see their products everywhere in construction. Peoria, right? They were approached by several foreign governments for the sale of tractors for military use. Afghanistan, the proud, the great, the heroes. I'm just saying, requested the design of an armored body that could be fitted to the Caterpillar diesel tractor and ordered 9 tractor tanks and 3 tank bodies. The armored plate was manufactured in Philadelphia, Henry Diston Saw Works. Right? So what I'm saying is that you see this. You're like, oh, it's like what the Soviets did, what I mentioned before. They made the tractor tanks. Well, no, this is literally like a kit. This was like a removable hull that you could add to the tractors. So you could do your farm work or try to do your construction or whatever with these tractors. And then when you needed to fight, your enemies, you would put this on. So, and you would use it. And then when peace was there, you could use this as a tractor again. I like that. That's really cool. It's really kind of interesting. Okay, did it work in real life? Probably abysmally, but I'm just saying that the concept was interesting. So, and of course, remember in Afghanistan, the land of the heroes, you still had Renault tanks, and apparently still working. So, the heroes of Afghanistan were still using these things at some point. All over, and in the Middle East, you'll still find, I think, working Renaults. Amazing. I think you'd be mad. Maybe now they finally have, bitten the dust, but you can never tell. So you just gotta keep the things running. But yeah, the early American armor, very interesting book. I wish it would have ended here, and then we didn't have this stupid war. But it was fun. It was fun looking at these jalopies. So, so things that maybe like you imagine having one of these of your own. Wouldn't that be awesome? Yeah. Good luck, mate. All right.